So English, I would like to think I'm quite fluent in English. Mandarin, Chinese. French is the third one. The 0.25 is Espanol.
Ah, very good. Well, anyway, please give her and the entrepreneurs who are going to join you, when they join you, a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. But before I give introduction myself, I would love to welcome up the EF alumni. Nisarg from Affable. Welcome, please. And Milad from CMO. So, to give you all a sense of what kind of the organization is, Entrepreneur First is a new kind of incubator and accelerator. So what we do is we find individuals, generally from academia, basically a lot of PhDs. These two are PhDs, right?
I'm not.
Oh, you're not? Oh, this is an outlier. Okay, but yeah. So generally we go to research institutions, universities, and we find all these deep tech people, and increasingly now domain experts, to come on board as individuals. We tell them this. We tell them, hey, you've been thinking about academia your whole lives, but there's an alternate path for you. Instead of doing academia, start a company. Make big impact using technology. So that's what we do. We've been doing this since 2011. So we started in London, headquartered in London. We are in Singapore. We have been in Singapore for about almost 2 years now. We just opened in Berlin fairly recently, and we're looking at a few more other cities globally. So yeah, so these individuals, and they come in, and we basically we help them find co-founders, and that's super important to build companies. And I'll go a little bit into that in a short bit. But first about myself, thanks again, Tom, for introducing me. So my background is that I straddle media and technology. I've also worn 3 hats. I built and sold a company as an entrepreneur. I also started and ran an investment fund focused on technology companies, so seed investments. And today I still angel invest. And the third hat is that I do a lot of these media stuff. Across a documentary I just hosted will be airing this weekend, and I also do like podcasts. So 3 different hats, yeah, and 3.25 languages. Yeah, but yeah, so that's me. So my role, as was rightly put, was that my role in EF is to talk to these individuals, talk to the companies that are newly forming, and basically from pattern recognition, advise them, like, hey, you know what's a problem you're thinking of working on, and I look at them and I think, maybe this co-founder and this co-founder, there's no fit, there's no chemistry. This is like dating, right? Because what we allow is a platform to allow people to co-founder date. And if I think they should break up, I will ask them to break up. If I think they should stay together, then yes. Or if I tell them to break up and they insist that they want to be with each other, then so be it. But that's a process, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But first, yes, I would like to get Nisarg to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Gwen. Hi, I'm Nisarg. I'm a founder of Affable with my co-founder Swam, who's also here. What we are building is a platform, a new age platform using artificial intelligence and computer vision to enable the new wave of what we have been calling the word of mouth marketing, but through influencers or micro influencers. And I will go about it in detail in our discussion, but I happened to join EF last year in the latest cohort. Before that, I was in India, did my undergrad from IIT in India, worked with Goldman Sachs for 3 years, realized that this is not where I see myself, quit my job, and then joined EF.
So basically non-PhD, finance, and then EF, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yes, Milad.
So thanks, Gwen, also for introduction. I'm Milad, together with Sadaf, my co-founder. We are the founders of CMode. We're building a software to help neurologists better predict strokes by combining computational fluid dynamics and artificial intelligence. I'm coming from a PhD in applied physics. Before that, I did mechanical engineering for my bachelor. And my co-founder is coming from a AI machine learning background for medical applications. Before that, she was an electrical engineer. That's about us.
Thank you so much. So just now I mentioned that how EF, our value proposition, is really trying to bring in individuals to co-found teams. And this co-founding a team is one of the most difficult things in the world, and we're trying to do that well, hopefully, and find a process. But I'd like to go to Milad.
Sure.
So there's a super interesting story here. So can you tell me more? How do you come to working with Sadaf, right? Saraf.
Yeah, correct. So there is a pre-story to that story, and that story is something that EF, one of the things that EF does well, and it was one of our reasons for getting into it. It was finding one good problem that needs a solution. A lot of PhDs, including myself, we build solutions without problems. We build really fancy technical scientific solutions, but there is no problem that needs it. We joined EF because we wanted to do the exact opposite of that. We wanted to find one good problem and then go ahead and solve it, focus on it. So my co-founder and I, we are actually married. And no, we're not crazy. So we founded the company together, but not right from the start. We were actually in different teams in EF at the beginning.
So they were dating other people, essentially?
Yeah, correct, in some way. So yeah, we were dating other people. We had other co-founders. And because we are coming from very different backgrounds. I'm a mechanical engineer, she's a mathematician, electrical engineer. So there was no problem that needed these skills to match. The reason that we founded a team together was because of the problem. So Saraf had this big interview with a big shot neurologist here in Singapore, now one of our advisors. And the neurologist was describing a general problem, that we have a problem with predicting strokes, and half of the words he used was her field, the other half was completely my field. So because I rambled on about fluid dynamics, she knew the terms. We spoke about it. We spoke to 50 other clinicians in Singapore, 50, and US and Europe, to essentially just validate that this problem actually exists. And then we founded a team together, and we founded C-Mode. So it was the whole reason that the team was founded because of the problem. Yeah.
And Nisarg, what problem were you trying to solve, and how do you get to that problem?
So personally, while I was working at Goldman Sachs and I was working in the technology division, I've been in technology for a while, and I was developing products on the side, which I would launch mobile apps, websites, and I would get users.
What kind of domain though?
Sorry?
The
these are more like consumer-facing products where you, for example, I developed one app which was what people would use to keep track of what they're learning every day. So if this audience learns something new about entrepreneurship today, if they want to share it with others in the community, you could use my app to do that. But while I was developing these apps, and the biggest problem was getting the word out. How do I tell more people who are relevant to listen about my story, to care about my story, and to try it out? I quit Goldman Sachs with the vision to be able to create something which can help me solve this problem of spreading the word. And at EF, I met Swayam, who has a background in computer vision, artificial intelligence. His parents run a fashion label, and he had firsthand seen how they work with celebrities to be able to do this kind of a word of mouth. But what we realized was there is this huge gap in the market which technology can address about being able to scale word-of-mouth marketing, and how we can bring in the technology with our relevant skills is where we started working on this.
So it sounded like you were trying to scratch your own itch, right?
Yeah.
And for your co-founder, it was his kind of like one step removed, but seeing how that was an itch, essentially. Yeah. And did you come in with EF with that thing, and then how did it evolve to what Affable is today?
When I came to EF, this was something which was on the back of my mind, but maybe not the thing that I came and started working on. But this was more like a discussion that we had with when I met with Swayam, and we were like, oh, seems like both of us have. I knew the problem. I didn't know the solution then. So
But what did, when you first came in, because I want to go down into this process of finding the problem and then finding a startup, right? And starting a startup. When you first met your potential other co-founders before Swayam, what were you saying? Were you saying that, oh, I think it's hard to get your word out? Were you more specific, like it's hard to get your word out to influencers? Like what?
The problem was it's hard to get the word out. The problem was that current marketing techniques, although social media marketing is huge and they are effective, but then there is this niche problem of word of mouth, which was a problem. So I knew the problem, and I faced the problem personally, and I did not know the solution. And what I was doing was I was talking to people about what they felt could be solutions, what they had experienced in either industry or from their experience in different jobs they would have been in, and what is the kind of technology that could come in to fix this problem. So as Sadaf mentioned, Affable was born out because of a problem that
Milad.
existed.
We know each other very well.
So Affable was born out because of a problem that existed that we wanted to solve badly.
Yeah. Okay. And how about you, Milad? The problem, when you say that you and Sadaf, right, pronouncing correctly, when you say that you found the problem and then decided to start it together, you briefly mentioned kind of the process of speaking and then you came to that. But how long was that? Do you take like 2 weeks to like speak to the various people kind of, on the side?
It was nearly all of our focus in the first 1.5 months or 2 months, I would say. Part of that focus went into making just a prototype that was like held together by glue, a piece of software that shows that we have potentially a solution to this. But what was happening on validating the problem was we started with a general outline. We never pivoted, but we sort of, fine-tuned on what exactly are the parameters that when are found, these people have the problem solved. That happened by speaking to one cardiovascular doctor and another and another and another. And I think we were in NUH a ridiculous amount of time. Nearly we saw all of their cardiovascular doctors, other hospitals here in Singapore, Skype meetings at 12 in the midnight with some guy in Sweden to find that is it actually a problem? If this is solved, will you guys buy it?
And so when you had the conversation, generally, how did they react? Were they like, yes, we think it's a problem, or yes, we think it's a problem?
It evolved. So something that was interesting, and so throughout the whole EF journey and after, there are some things that are still unsolved for me, and one of them is that problem validation. Because a lot of times when we spoke to clinicians, we had to sort of educate them at the beginning, which was really weird for a mechanical engineer to do, but then have them come in and give their input. And as things progressed, and we found out, we sort of fine-tuned based on what they heard from us, what literature we read, and like putting it back together. That's how the conversations also evolved from yes, it's a problem to yes, this is what I will
So,
buy.
you mentioned something, right? So, as a mechanical engineer, and that's Sadaf's background, right? So, you're more used to like given a problem and then, hey, solve it, right?
Yeah, so I did a PhD. Like a lot of PhDs, I learned a lot. There was a lot of useful skills, but a lot of the problems that are solved are not really a problem. I was in a fundamental science school as well, so it was about curiosity a lot. And yeah, so that's the main difference.
So I want to talk about a word you mentioned, pivot. Let us clarify, because I think a lot of people have different definitions of the word. Can I just get a show of hands? You've heard of the word pivot applied in startups? Yeah, okay, a handful. So let's clarify what you mean.
Sure. Well, what I mean by pivoting is actually maybe the opposite of what other people are thinking about. We never changed direction completely. We just started from this picture and then narrowed it down to this single problem that needs to be solved. It's a technical problem, it's a hard problem, but it's one problem. So we never pivoted, we sort of just like, hit the target. Yeah.
But what do you mean by that? So like you started off with this like big nebulous thing, and then it slowly, as you talk to more people, you chipped away?
Exactly. So they had problem with stroke patients, they had problem with a stroke prediction. We narrowed it down to how exactly is that problem felt, who feels that, and because of what. So what should be provided to solve that?
So that was clarification, right?
It was a lot of fine-tuning, yeah. It was never like a complete change of direction, I don't know, from building a medical software to building a better car.
Although, this is where like, I feel like there's a lot of assumptions in the word pivot. So, if I may, the word pivot generally applied to startups, you generally mean, okay, you do idea A, and then you realize that no one wants to pay you for idea A, and you're like, okay, let's pivot to idea B. And yeah, sometimes it's like, how closely idea A and idea B is related could be very far apart or could be adjacent. And I think there's a lot of things there where if you do adjacent, it's not a pivot. It may be, really depending. But how would you define your journey? Did you pivot a lot? Did you change your idea a lot? How did it morph and evolve?
So when we started, we had a hypothesis of a solution in mind. We felt that if you build something like a chatbot which can automatically talk to many people, it would kind of solve the problem. And then we went and tried to pitch the solution to potential customers or potential early partners, right? And they were like, yes, this sounds interesting. And when we asked them, would you pay for something like this, is where they started like, So this is where we get a feedback that, yes, the problem exists. But then what we started to do was we tried to understand what was their motivation, what was the root cause of the problem. Was it just getting the word out, or was it identifying whom to work with to get the word out? Was it quantifying this whole getting the word out thing? Because a lot of people do a lot of activities today to get the word out, but they're not able to quantify it in terms of data. They're not able to quantify in terms of the effectiveness of how much they spend on this stuff, right? So what we then started to do was a pivot in our approach of, rather than selling a solution, we asked them what they wanted. And in the startup's journey, as important it is to sell, it is also important to know what they want to buy. And this was an interesting revelation for us, where we stopped selling for a while, and we just tried to talk to, so we had meetings with over 100 marketers in Singapore. We had calls with over 150 other people over email and Skype. And we tried to understand their inherent motivation to even talk to us, to entertain us, and what was the problem that they were actually facing.
And why would they take a meeting with you?
So they would take a meeting with us because, and there are like 3 main reasons why these people take meetings with early stage startups. One is purely to be in the loop, where they want to know what is happening on ground level, where if I tell them that we are an early stage startup, we're working on this exciting new technology, they want to know what it is, what is going on in the world apart from what they do. Second is they genuinely believe that if we are solving a problem, by entertaining us and becoming an early partner with us, they benefit from it. And third is also, I feel a lot of times, is this whole fear of missing out, where they feel that probably today they don't need it, but they want to know what's going on.
FOMO applies to everyone, huh?
Yeah.
And how about yourself, Milad?
That was a great answer.
Yeah.
I totally agree with the 2 main reasons. One thing that was a bit curious for us was we're writing cold emails to the head of vascular surgery in some hospital. And we're like, yeah, we're 2 PhDs, we did this and this and that before. Can we please have a chat to better understand your needs in this particular field? And they replied back. So this was quite strange for us. But I think the 2 main reasons are what Nisarg said, that if that initial introduction is just enticing enough to show that this can have potential to become something interesting, they would take a meeting.
So I want to move on to de-risking, right? But I would like to just tell the audience, I would love to open up the floor to questions if there's any in like maybe 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, yeah? But yeah, so going back to kind of the topics, I want to move on to risk mitigation.
Yeah.
When I say risk in startup, what do you think? Do you think you're taking a lot of risk? When people say, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you're a risk taker. What do you think of that?
All right, so there are 2 things here. One is personal risk. And that was something that I felt really strongly before starting a startup or before joining EF. So the personal risk is I'm essentially following this unknown path that is doomed to be failed. So, and now going through that, I really have an opposite view. There is no personal risk in that. The amount of learning and the amount of work that you put in, it just comes back, definitely comes back, even if this fails. That's the personal risk. And another thing that EF does well is to make this first step really safe. That's something that Sadaf also mentioned before. It's this first step, especially for someone from a technical, academic background, that don't go to a big corporation, don't do a postdoc, don't stay in academia, but let's say if you can actually find interesting people and solve a good problem. And they make it safe. They build a safe environment about doing the whole thing, both financially and in terms of mentorship. That's really important. That's personal risk. The company risk is something that we're mitigating every day. What are the regulatory channels? What can kill this, essentially? And that is something that we're working in every day. They're 2 different.
And I want to hear more, but for you, how do you see risk? When people say, again, like you're a risk taker, what do you think of that?
Definitely, right? Like when I had a discussion with my boss that I wanted to quit to do my own startup, his first reaction was, no, you're taking this big risk. You're too young for this. Why do you want to do this? Same discussion with parents, family. Do you want to take this risk early?
My story was that my parents thought I was jobless for like many years.
So personally, entrepreneurship is something which is more of an attitude also, right? Where you like that risk, you like that thrill in the risk, right? And as a startup, the risk is every day, every moment. We're constantly firefighting. Now, at a moment you reach where there are so many stakeholders in terms of customers, in terms of your own employees, in terms of investors, etc., that you need to make sure that all these stakeholders are happy, they're taken care of, and the product has to come up well. The competitors might be lurking around. So in terms of what could be risks is, competitor gaining advantage over us. There might be risks in terms of some investment falling through. There might be risks where a really good hire that we definitely wanted, or an employee of ours without which we cannot work, decides to move on. So it's like a total firefight, things that would keep you up all
So
night.
how do you look at all these risks then? How do you mitigate them? There's so many different, because everything can go wrong. Everything and anything.
Do you want to start?
So totally everything can go wrong, and we know experts because we just started up very recently. The way we do it right now
Even
is,
with people who started many companies, they're no experts. Life is so
the
unpredictable.
way we do it is, know the risks. The first step to mitigate a risk is know what they are. You need to be honest to yourself and your co-founder at least that these are clear risks that we have. Without acknowledging the risk, you cannot mitigate them. So in terms of employee risks, we make sure that the team culture is nice. We make sure that the concerns of the teams are heard. In terms of investor risk, we make sure that they're updated. Any kind of issues, any kind of roadblocks that they might see are addressed carefully. In terms of customers, we make sure that we have regular calls with them. We keep them in loop about product updates. We keep them in loop about any concerns that they have regarding pricing, etc. So it's just acknowledging as step one and actively, proactively addressing it before it becomes a big risk that you can.
But how about unknowns? Sorry, I give you the difficult question, but yeah.
No, absolutely. First, I totally agree with Nisarg's answer on that. The question that we were constantly asking ourselves every day, and still are what can kill this? And then trying to firefight and trying to fight against it. And now it's at a stage like, how can we essentially make this better or grow this so the risks are mitigated? That's one. One thing that I want to mention, maybe it also answers about the unknowns, I don't know, it's adding on that. In the middle of the journey, we spoke to a PhD who was like the head of software development for Roche, or they were building this really fancy medtech software essentially. And we were having a chat with him, and what we verified was, is the process that we are going through similar to what Roche is going through with that group? It's just they had probably 50 people working on it. We had 2.5. And the process was similar. The process was similar. It's essentially how fast can you achieve it? How much leverage do you have to achieve that process? So at the end of the day, there are risks for a startup, there are risks for big companies. All you do is try to acknowledge them and like firefight fast.
One thing that you could do to firefight with unknown risks is, one is think about what all could this be, but if something comes out of the blue, you should still be in the position to defend, right? So there always has to be buffer in terms of an employee, in terms of an investment, in terms of a customer, where nothing should be that one-stop killer where if this thing doesn't go through, that kills your business. So, personally, what we do is we identify if there is a single point of failure, we have to address them immediately as it is identified. There can never be a single point of failure in a startup.
Yeah, but then how do you optimize for most degrees of freedom then?
It is always a trade-off, I believe, where you have to optimize for short and long term. In the short term, it is about going fast as a startup, where pace is very critical. You need to lead the pack, where a competitor cannot come back and kill you in terms of that. You cannot be chasing all the while. But in the long term, there cannot be this single point of failure that you establish while running, which could kill your business.
At this point, any other questions? Any questions actually from anyone? Oh, we have one question. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Sir, and there's a mic?
Is there a mic?
Oh, it's a mic.
Oh, it's a mic? Okay, great. Interesting. I'm sure that you have, along your journey, you have interacted and engaged with many larger companies. I'd like to get your perspective. What are the key pain points that you have when you interact with large companies, and what do you think they can do a better job with?
Be brutal. I think we have a lot of big companies here who would like to hear the truth, right? Yes? Sure, yeah? We have nods here. Okay, great.
Okay. Do you want to?
So there are two sides of the story where what we when we talk to these large corporations, and in our business of this influencer marketing space, we have to talk to these large customers from day one, right? What we've seen is two sides of the story where one is there is this extra long kind of sales cycle. If you say where you meet for one person, you show them a product, you talk about it, then you have to meet another person, you have to meet another person, where you eventually reach a point where the decision taker is looking at your product. Before that, it is just going through the loops, which is problematic for startups because if we spend so much manpower and time in this sales cycle, it kind of slows us down. But then there are a lot of these innovation programs, a lot of focused groups that are being established at enterprises now. For example, Unilever has its own focus group. There are media arms out there, big digital media arms, which are running programs to onboard startups to help work closely with startups, which is trying to now ease this process where they just introduce us to this arm, which works closely with startups, and we get a kind of easy entry into these big corporations. But yeah, that's for our story.
That's a really good point. Speed is really important for a small team and for a startup. And big corporations can be slow. So you have to talk to one person and he's super convinced, and then that person has to convince on your behalf another person, which is slightly strange. Like you can set it together and we can convince both. That's one. The other one, adding to that, is maybe the issue of IP, intellectual property. And maybe startups can be a bit delusional on this, I'm not sure. But talking from a technical product, what business people call deep tech products, you're always worried about IP when you're talking to big corporations. If there is some way that can be a safe environment, then it would be fantastic for startups to work with big corporations.
Yesterday we were at the Unilever Foundry, and one of the challenges there is that, or advantage is that the startups there are in close proximity with their key so-called potential partners. Is proximity to your potential partners important for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very important, yeah, because it just makes it so fast, where now it is not about cold emails, it just knock on the door. So it just, we cross over several hurdles if we are close to if we are in proximity to our partners.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Even a link to an engineer, a product manager in those companies would be very helpful for startups. Makes things move really fast instead of writing an email and waiting 2 days for an answer. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, one question here, please.
Just to follow up on the question from this gentleman as well, is that I think the so-called big corporation oftentimes also have dedicated team looking for potential technology to be applied. I know we did, and we've been on the worldwide tour looking for different startups, talking to them. And oftentimes we found that the startup per se, the entrepreneurs do not understand or do not foresee its application and the benefits in the automotive industry. For example, I can already foresee stroke prediction could be a good opportunity in the car in the future. And this is often the challenge we encounter, that the entrepreneur didn't know or it's difficult for them to accommodate what would it be if it were to be an industry application that was not intended for. And oftentimes prototyping, especially rapid prototyping, helps a lot. right? If you could just do something, and oftentimes it's a lot easier for the corporation to push it and also allow for you guys to do that. I want to know what are the methodology that you guys do in terms of manifesting the idea you have, even if it's not for the industry that it was intended for. If there is, can you briefly tell us the processes?
That's really good feedback about a startup not really knowing what they're building and the application. It's really good feedback. It all goes back to, again, finding a good problem. I've never been in this situation where, as a big company, I have to advise a startup on like how you could do this better. But one thing that comes to my mind is that big corporations probably have better insight into the whole industry. Sometimes on a lot of things, on sales, on regulations, on just this tiny feature that if you don't have it, the user won't use it. These are things that big corporations know, and they can advise the startups to essentially make their product better. Yeah, that's all that comes to my mind.
I feel in the startup's journey, at least in early stages when they are probably 2 years, 5 years in the business, they are always trying to optimize for one problem, because the way it works is if you spread your net very wide, you might lose focus and you don't end up getting far in one space at all, right? So the initial focus is always on identifying that one problem and focusing on building it out. But having said that, the founders should be actively listening to what's going on in the industry, should be a part of conversations where they can find out what could be potential applications and at least keep it in the back of their minds. And they should definitely do that. But as he mentioned, it is big corporations have the advantage of being around for a while, have the advantage of having so many people who know so much, which definitely as a team of probably even 100 people right now focusing on one problem I wouldn't have. So I think a lot of, if there could be more channel of communications between these big corporations and startups, not necessarily in the space of, you give a very good example, right? He wouldn't have thought about using it in a car, or maybe he would have, but coming it from a car manufacturer, even this exploratory idea of what do you think, having these conversations would help the startup ecosystem and help big corporations also.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap up one question. These gentlemen will be available, right? You'll be available for additional questions after this. Sure. But one last question. From your startup journeys for respective companies, what were the biggest mistake that you made and what you learned from it?
Go first.
So we've been around for only like 6-7 months now, and we haven't got a lot of time to make a lot of mistakes yet, luckily. But in this short journey, recruitment, I would say, was one mistake we made, where we hired a wrong person very early. We had to work out as founders about how to deal with it, how it was slowing us down, and it was not the right choice to make. We were totally inexperienced in terms of making the right first hire. So personally, for our company, it was recruitment, and we dealt with it as soon as we identified it. We never let it become a huge problem. And yeah.
You fired?
Yes.
Okay, but you wasted some salary, right? Some money.
Over around 2 months of.
It didn't kill you. Good job.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it would have killed us if we would have let it go in terms of, let it be. And for startups, the first 10 employees can make or kill it, right? You cannot make a wrong hire in the initial 10 employees. That can literally kill your business.
Yeah.
That's it.
Fire fast. Milad, closing words.
Sure. I think it was maybe a personal mistake, not a startup mistake. It was coming from an academic background. All I had learned to do, and all academics are trying to push to do, is build everything from scratch and know everything about it, even if it's not your focus. So I tried to do that at some point in building our prototype, and I failed miserably. So it was a tough lesson to essentially start learning how to delegate things that could be delegated and solved in a day, instead of I personally spending a week trying to learn a new thing, a new trade without a reason. It's a personal mistake, not a really startup mistake. We got hiring right. We had
This competition now.
No. We're really close friends. we essentially had really tough tests. We make the employees like, sit next to us and do a test.
Do the actual coding, actual
do
development.
the first day of the job.
Yeah, first day of the job. So thank you so much, Milad and Nisarg, and my name is Gwen. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully that was helpful, and thank you from Entrepreneur First.
Just to add one thing to that,
Yes.
right? Startups is not that bad. I mean, this discussion was it went
How
into
bad
how
it was.
difficult it is, and how challenging it is, but it is so much fun to do it. Like, it is very exciting to be able to do this, to go on this journey. Any person who has not only like started a business, but even led initiatives inside a big corporation, right? There is this whole concept of entrepreneurship where you start an initiative, you go through it, and you lead it, right? To do this whole process with or without being in a corporation, it's an enlightening journey. It's so much fun, and the challenges are just a part of it. Like, the big and the best part of it is living the journey.
Hey, you should all quit your jobs and start companies. All right. Okay, thank you so much again.